Today we discuss about HTTP requests in Laravel. In this we have different concepts like interacting with the request, input, files, and within the interacting with the request there are subtopics like accessing the request, request path, host and method, request headers, request IP address, content negotiation, PSR 7 requests. And if we come to input, there are subtopics like retrieving input, input presence, merging additional input, old input, cookies, input trimming and normalization. And if we come to files, there are subtopics like retrieving uploaded files, storing uploaded files. And apart from these concepts, configuring trusted proxies, configuring trusted hosts. So these are the main topics that are available in Laravel HTTP requests. And we will see one by one. These topics are very important if we take into consideration as so HTTP requests. How do we handle all these HTTP requests in Laravel? So first we will see how do we interact with the HTTP request. So first in that, accessing the request. To obtain an instance of the current HTTP request via dependency injection, we should type hint the HTTP request class and our route closure or controller method. So if we have, for example, store method in our Laravel controller, so to that store method we have to pass request instance as a type hint within the store method. So we can use that request object and we can use that input method. So in order to obtain the input type value, input values from the form, whatever we submit. So this is the main instance, a request instance in order to access the request fields. So dependency injection. So before that we will see how do we type hint request class in routing. So we can use use statement like use illuminate HTTP request class semicolon. So like this we type hint the request class and we can create we will be passing that request object to the closure, to the get method of route. So route get URI comma closure. So to that closure we will be passing the request object. Now we will see dependency injection and route parameters. So the process of type hinting, so in this way like use HTTP request, or we can use controller, use app HTTP controllers, user controller. So this kind of type hinting is called dependency injection. And once we type hint, so after type hinting we will be pass that corresponding class to that closure, route closure. So that process is called dependency injection. And parameters, if we come to parameters, ID. So route put user ID. So within the braces we will be mentioning the ID. So like this we will be passing the parameter to the URI. So this is all about dependency injection and route parameters. So now we will see different methods in Laravel in order to access the path, request host, and the request method. So let's see one by one. Retrieving the current request path. So by making use of path method on the request object, so we will be retrieving the request path. $request object notation, path method. And after that, inspecting the request path or route. So we will be inspecting by making use of is method. So by making the path method, we will retrieve, and to inspect the current request path or route, we will be using the is method. And also if we want to inspect the current route, so we will be using route is, so admin.star. So like this we will be using the route is method in order to inspect the current route. After that we will be checking the method retrieving the request URL. So there are different methods to retrieve the request URL. So like URL method, full URL method, full URL with query method, full URL without query method. So like this we will be having different methods in order to retrieve the request URL. Now we will see how do we retrieve the request host. So there are different methods like host method, HTTP host method, scheme, and HTTP host method. So these are the methods that are used to retrieve the request host. Now we will see how do we retrieve the request method. So generally we will be mentioning the get method, post method, put method, patch method within the form tag. So within that, so whenever we mention that form method, so we will be retrieving that method, or we can be checking that method in the controllers by making use of method. I mean $request object notation method semicolon. So this is a method that is used to retrieve the request method, and we can check that particular method, whether it is get or post or put, like that is method of post. So like this we will be using the Laravel methods in order to retrieve the request method. Now we will see request headers. So header method is used to add in order to check the what kind of header information. So we will be using the header method. So it will accept optional second parameter that will be returned if the header is not present on the request. We will be using has header method in order to determine if the request contains a given header. For example, we want to check whether it is a header name, X header name. So we will be using the request has header. So like this we will be using the header and has header methods. So for convenience, the bearer token method may be used to retrieve a bearer token from the authorization header. So we will be using the bearer token method. Request IP address. So we will be using the IP method in order to retrieve the IP address of client, so that made the request to our application. If we want to retrieve an array of IP addresses, so including all the client IP addresses that were forwarded by proxies, so we will be using the IPS method. So IP method, it will retrieve the current request IP address that is made to our application, and IPS method will be used to retrieve all the IP addresses that are forwarded by our proxies. Content negotiation. So we will be using get acceptable content types method, so which will return an array containing all of the content types accepted by the request. So this is a method, get acceptable content types method. The accepts method, one more method called accepts method, which will accept an array of content types and return true if any of the content types are accepted by the request. So like this we will be using the accepts method. And one more method called prefers method, so which will determine which content type out of a given array of content types is most preferred by the request. So prefers method we will be using, so based on the preferences. Since many applications only serve HTML or JSON, so we can use expects JSON method to quickly determine if the incoming request expects a JSON response. So this is a method, expects JSON method will be used in order to determine if the incoming request expects a JSON response. PSR 7 requests. The PSR 7 standard specifies interfaces for HTTP messages including requests and responses. It will provide a standard interfaces. So once we install by using Composer requires Symfony by PSR HTTP message -bridge, Composer require NiHome by PSR 7. So by using these two commands after installing PSR compatible implementations, so we can use this PSR 7 standard within our routing file like this. So we can type hint. Use PSR HTTP message server request interface. So once we type hint, we will be passing this interface object, server request interface class object into the route method, like route get URI comma closure. To that closure we will be passing the interface instance. So server request interface class instance, request instance. Now we will see how do we retrieve input. Retrieving all input data. So by making use of all method on the request object, we can retrieve all input data. We can retrieve all input data as a collection by making use of collect method. If we want to retrieve a particular input value, so then we will be using input method and particular field $request input of name. So particular field we will be using. So one more method, if I want to retrieve one more field, so $request input name comma email, like that we will be using. So if I want to pass the default value to the input method when we retrieve a particular field, then we will be using as a second parameter. So $request input name comma abcd, like that. So like this we will be passing the second parameter. And if we want to retrieve all the input values as an associative array, then we will be using input method without any parameters. So on the request object like this. So $request input method. So without any parameters, we will be using input method, and it will retrieve all the input values as a associative array. Retrieving input from the query string. So we will be using the query method. For example, I want to retrieve name field from the query string. Then we will be using $request object notation query method. Within that braces we will be passing the name as an argument. So like this we will be passing the whatever the query string value we want to retrieve, so that field name we will be passing as a parameter to the query method. So if I want to pass default value, so then as a second parameter we will be passing the default value to the query method. And if we want to retrieve all the query string values as a associative array, so then we will be making use of query method without any parameters. So $request query method. So like this we will be using the query method to retrieve all the input values as a associative array. Retrieving JSON input values. For example, we have JSON data and we want to retrieve particular value. So then we will be using dot notation, like $request input of user dot name. So like this we will be retrieving a particular value if the content type of header of the request is set to application/JSON. So if the JSON type data is there, so we will be retrieving that particular value by making use of dot notation, input of user dot name. So like this we will be retrieving the JSON data. Retrieving stringable input values. So if I want to retrieve only primitive string type data, input data, then we will be making use of string method on the request instance. $request string of name trim method. So like this we will be retrieving the string input values. Retrieving boolean input values. So we will be making use of boolean method on that particular request instance. Retrieving date input values. So if we want to retrieve only date type values, we will be using the date method on that particular request instance. So request date of birthday. So like that we will be using the date method. If the input value is present but has an invalid format, so it will generate exception called invalid argument exception. So it will be thrown if the input value is if the input value has invalid format. So this is a exception generated when we use date method if it has an invalid format. Retrieving enum input values. So we will be using enum method in order to retrieve the enum input values. First we will type hint enum types. Then after that we will be passing that particular enum values to the enum method. For example, $request enum method status scope resolution operator class. So enum class as a second parameter. So like this we will be passing the enum input values. Retrieving input via dynamic properties. So in order to make it the dynamic properties, so we will be making use of $request, and we will be using that directly. The column name we will be using $request column name. So like this we will be retrieving the directly the value of particular column. Retrieving a portion of the input data. So we can retrieve a particular portion of columns. Only method will be used in order to retrieve a portion of the input data. So for example, I want to retrieve username, password. So then we will be using the only method. If I want to retrieve, if I want to exclude a particular portion of input data, then we will be making use of except method. So like this we will be using only method and except method in order to retrieve a portion of input data. Input presence. For example, if we want to check a particular value is present or not from the input data, so we will be using has method. And also if we want to check multiple columns like name, comma, email, so then we will be using the has any method. And if we want to execute given closure if a value is present on the request, so we will be using the when has method. When has method. So it will execute the given closure if a value is present on the request. And we will be using filled method. So in order to check the request is not an empty string, so it will ensure that input field. So we will be using the filled method. If we want to check multiple columns whether they have filled or not, any filled method we will be using. And also when filled method, it will execute the given closure if a value is present on the request and it is not an empty string. So it will be executing particular closure when it is filled. So like this we will be using the when filled method. And also we will be using missing method. Suppose if a particular column is absent from the request, so then we will be checking by making use of missing of name. And one more method we will be using when missing method. So it will be used in order to execute a particular closure when some particular field is missing. So like this we will be using the missing and when missing method. Merging additional input. So we can use merge method in order to merge, in order to add some additional input data to the existing input data. So like this we will be using the merge method. And also we will be using the merge if missing method. So if some particular column name is missing and if we want to check particular data, if we want to merge particular input data whenever some missing column is here, like this we will be using the merge if missing method. And if I want to retrieve particular old input, so there are like flashing input to the session and flashing input then redirecting. So like this we will be using different methods like flash method, flash only method, flash except method. So these are the three flash methods that are used to flashing input to the session. And also flashing input then redirect. So redirect method and with input method. So these are the methods that will be used as a combination in order to flash the input and redirecting. Retrieving old input. So we will be using old method in order to retrieve the old value of particular column name. Cookies. So cookie method will be used in order to retrieve cookies from the requests. Input trimming and normalization. By default, Laravel includes app HTTP middleware trim strings and Illuminate Foundation HTTP middleware convert empty strings to null middleware in our application's global middleware stack. These middlewares are listed in the global middleware stack by the app HTTP kernel class. So these middlewares will automatically trim all incoming string fields on the request. So trimming will be done on the incoming string fields by making use of trim strings and convert empty strings to null middlewares. So this allows to not to have worry about the normalization concerns in our routes and controllers. So this is about trimming. And now we will see normalization. So disabling input normalization. So if you would like to disable the behavior of all the incoming requests, we may remove the two middleware from our application's middleware stack by removing them from the middleware property of app HTTP kernel class. So if you would like to disable string trimming and empty string conversion to a subset of requests, so we can use skip when method offered by the both middleware. So this method accepts a closure which should return true or false to indicate if input normalization should be skipped. So skip when method will be provided by these both middlewares. Like this we will be disabling the trimming. Files. So we will be using file method in order to retrieve uploaded files, and we will be using has file method. So whether there is a file called photo, for example, so has file of photo. So like this we will be checking the file uploaded. Validating successful uploads. So we will be using isValid method on the file method. So the statement will be like this: $request object notation file on that isValid method will be used. File paths and extensions. So we will be using the extension method. So whenever we upload file, in order to check the extension, so it will give the extension of the file which we have uploaded. Other file methods, storing uploaded files. So store method will be used in order to store the particular file which we have uploaded. And also we can store the uploaded file into S3 bucket. So by making use of store method as a second parameter, like this: request photo store images comma S3. So like this we will be using the store method. And also store as method. So if we want a file name to be automatically generated, we may use store as method, which accepts the path, file name and disk name as its argument. Configuring trusted proxies. So we will be using trust proxies middleware that is included in our Laravel application, which allows us to quickly customize the load balancers or proxies that should be trusted by our application. And there will be a proxies property of this middleware, $proxies property. So it will be used in order to provide proxies. So within a trust proxies class, we will be using $proxies property. Trusting all proxies. So if we mention star symbol within the $proxies property, so it means that it will be trusting all proxies. Configuring trusted hosts. So we will be using trust hosts middleware, like this app HTTP middleware, trust hosts middleware. So this is used to configure trusted hosts. and there is a method called all subdomain of application URL. So for that we will be passing that all the hosts. The all subdomains of application URL helper method. So it will return a regular expression matching all subdomains of our application's app.url configuration value. So this helper method provides a convenient way to allow all of our application's subdomains when building an application that utilizes wildcard subdomains. So in cases of subdomains, we will be using the all subdomains of application URL method. So this is all about HTTP requests in Laravel. So thank you so much. This is Universal Horse Star Ravindar Reddy Yampalla. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of my fans, supporters and followers. And special thanks to all of my YouTube subscribers. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.